5:30 p.m. tonight, August 18th, 15th. Sorry, I'm in a hurry. So first item on our agenda tonight, we'll call the meeting to order right now. We'll have the roll call, Madam.
Here.
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 Thank you, I'm here.
And Councilmember Rodriguez is absent.
Thank you very much. So the first item tonight is Tenant Protection Policies Work Program. And I think we're going to have a presentation. Is your microphone on?
Sorry, let me start over. Good evening, Honorable Mayor and City Council. My name is Eloisa Murillo Garcia, and I'm the Housing Manager in the CDD Department. And I'm here with Christina Horaceberger, the CDD Director. Tonight, we will be discussing possible tenant protection policies as part of the Housing Work Program. Okay, thank you. Thank you. So objective 30 of the strategic plan is to explore explore policies to strengthen AB 1482 Protection Act. And it's part of the council adopted strategic plan for fiscal year 22-23. Tonight, we are seeking council direction on specific tenant protection policies to be prioritized for consideration in the fiscal year 22-23 Housing Work Program. Just to give you a quick background on AB 1482. It was enacted by the state in January 2020. Some of the protections under AB 1482 are to limit rent increases statewide to 5% per year, plus any rise in consumer price index, which cannot exceed 10%. AB 1482 does not apply to cities which have their own rent control ordinances, such as Oakland and San Francisco. San Mateo does not currently have a rent control ordinance. Another provision of AB 1482 are just cause eviction protections for covered tenants who have lived in their units for at least 12 months. And with just cause evictions, landlords essentially need a valid reason to evict a tenant. There are generally two categories of evictions. The first is at-fault evictions, and examples of this include non-payment of rent, criminal activity, or using the unit for an unlawful purpose. Under no-fault evictions, or examples of no-fault evictions include owner or family member intends to occupy the unit. The landlord intends to demolish or substantially remodel the unit with permits. And with no-fault evictions, the landlord is responsible for paying relocation equal to 1 month's rent. Prior to the enactment of AB 1482, there was Measure Q, which took place in 2016. Measure Q was initiated by the citizens of San Mateo as a charter amendment and was placed on the November 8th, 2016 ballot. Measure Q, had it passed, it would have established a rental housing commission and policies. And those policies include limiting annual rent increases, a requirement for just cause eviction to remove a tenant, and a requirement for tenant relocation assistance. However, Measure Q was defeated with approximately 60% of the voters voting no and 40% voting yes. In these next slides, we'll discuss a few potential tenant protection policies, and note that these are not listed in any particular order. So the first policy is a just cause eviction policy. And what this would do would be to adopt a just cause eviction policy and extend 1482 provisions to require tenant relocation payments for no fault evictions for tenants with less than 1 year of tenure. And under 1482, there is a no fault relocation payment requirement, but it only applies to renter households who have established 12 months of tenancy. Resources for this may include staff time, such as time to research options and best practices, including reviewing similar existing policies, engaging with other jurisdictions that have established such policies. Also community engagement activities. This is a very important component of all the potential policies that we'll be discussing tonight. And this would obviously include, community engagement activities to landlords and tenants and the community at large. Another potential policy are relocation payments. So under 1482, the relocation payment requirement is equal to 1 month's rent. But the proposed policy would be to expand the relocation payments to 3 months rather than 1 month. And again, similar to the other policy, the resources needed would include staff time and also performing community engagement activities. The next policy is renovation-related evictions. So this policy would limit renovation-related evictions by requiring that landlords obtain building permits before issuing an eviction notice. AB 1482 does permit no fault evictions for a substantial remodel, and it does require a building permit. However, AB 1482 does not require a property owner to obtain that building permit prior to issuing the eviction notice. Similar to the other policies, the resources would be staff time, meeting with other jurisdictions that have established similar policies, as well as community engagement activities. Related to the prior policy is the right to return policy. So this would establish a right to return for tenants that have been affected by renovation-related evictions at a new increased rent. AB 1482 does not require that the landlords give the tenant affected by the renovation-related evictions the right to return either at the previous rent that they were paying or at a new increased rent. And resources needed would be similar to the other policies. The final policy is the establishment of a rental registry. And just to note that the rental registry is not a component of AB 1482. But this is a policy that does appear on the draft housing element. So the rental registry would establish a means for collecting more rental housing data through the implementation of the rental registry. It could be a means for tracking rents and evictions citywide. Such data could provide valuable information that can assist in formulating new policies. So this would be more of a tool that would be used to frame housing policies. There could be some challenges with the rental registry, which could include just challenges in collecting the data, addressing privacy concerns for the landlord and tenants, determining whether to make the reporting mandatory, and if so, what would the enforcement mechanism look like? Resources needed similar to the prior policies, but this would also include making a determination on the costs and funding sources for the rental registry database and its administration. In terms of the timeline, staff anticipates that it would take approximately 12 months to fully implement each of the measures that were previously described. And the measures would be implemented sequentially based on current resources and other work plan priorities. However, staff could do outreach activities for all of the policies that were previously mentioned. So, we could do those outreach activities together to tenant and landlord groups regarding all of the measures, as well as doing research and survey for similar programs. And then staff would return to council for implementation considerations. And also, I wanted to note that there is a relationship to the policies that were previously mentioned to the draft 2023-2031 housing element. The draft housing element does include 3 policies that are related to tenant protections, which are H3.4, which are to expand tenant protections, H3.6 to examine a rental registry option, and 5.4.1, which is to establish tenant protections and local ordinance. And also, just to give you a quick update on where we are with the housing element, the draft was submitted to the California Department of Housing and Community Development on July 1st, and it's currently undergoing a 90-day review period, which ends on September 29th. After the review period is complete and all of the HCD comments have been addressed, we will then present that version to council for adoption prior to submitting the final version to HCD, and that is anticipated to be in late 2022. And also, as previously mentioned, that some of these policies do appear on the housing element, and the housing element does have target timelines for some of these policies, which range from accomplishing these programs in fiscal year 23-24 to 25-26. However, since the housing element is still in draft form, staff may adjust these timelines if so directed by council. Also wanted to note that staff is currently working on some other high priority projects at the moment. One being the draft housing element adoption and implementation after adoption. We are currently exploring the process to obtain a pro-housing designation. We're working on a 5-year consolidated plan, which is a plan that's required by HUD in order for us to continue to receive federal CDBG funds. And we're also working on streamlining the BMR waiting list process. And finally, another high priority item are to make updates to the city's inclusionary housing policy, and this must be completed in fiscal year 23-24. With that, we do have some questions for council that we would like to discuss tonight that appear on the screen. And the questions are, should staff begin researching tenant protection policies? If so, which ones and in what order of priority? Which work items should move down in priority to make time to prioritize AB 1482 work plan items? 3, are there any other tenant protection policies that council would direct staff to study? And 4, is there any additional direction to staff? I did want to note for the public that any post-packet comments will be available online. With that, we are happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Louisa. We're going to bring it back to the staff and you have a question. Good.
Well, thank you so much for the presentation. And explaining, kind of what 1482 has done. We also have 1482 in the context of moratorium 2+ years or so of on evictions and some rental assistance that's come in through the state. So my question really is, have we compiled any data that relates to how immediate the need is for these tenant protections? As we checked in with the tenants and the landlords to see what's happening out there as far as what might be needed in terms of tenant protections, which ones we might choose or not choose. Because I didn't see anything in the staff report and
Yes, so we currently haven't collected that data, but if we are directed by council to further pursue these policies, that would be part of the research and work that we do to bring forward recommendations.
Thank you very much. Questions?
Yeah. So you mentioned that it's in our draft housing element, and also I would assume that these same tenant protections are in other draft housing elements and housing elements that have been turned in by other communities. Are we seeing any direction from the state on whether they want to see these kinds of tenant protections in housing elements right now?
I'm not sure that we have enough of HCD feedback at this point in time for our closest neighbors to know what they're looking for. And so we know that Redwood City got some comments back on their housing element. We don't have ours back yet. And so I think it's a little bit of a wait and see in terms of seeing what HCD really wants to see from us. The feedback that's been given so far has not been consistent from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. And so I think we're interested in that as well, but nothing formal at this point. Not for our comments, but my guess would be that they probably would like to see that because they are pushing for some pretty visionary policies in the housing elements that we have heard about.
Is it fair to characterize the informal communications that we've received are that there's going to be a lot more scrutiny on the housing element and that there's going to have to be things like this in it in order for it to be approved? Is that the informal communication we've received?
Yes, that is our sense based on informal communication.
Am I seeing it correctly that that includes the first 3 items you summarized, the just cause, the relocation payments, and the renovation evictions, but not the rent registries? Or are they looking for that as well?
As Christina mentioned, we haven't received specific feedback on that, but that currently is one of our policies in the draft.
Did I also understand your presentation correct that the earliest we could get feedback back from the community would be like a 12-month period? Is that a reasonable amount of time to give staff to talk to the community and hear feedback on these items?
I don't think it would take 12 months just to get the feedback, but for each of these items, there was quite a bit of research entailed, finding out what other jurisdictions are doing, figuring out what best practices are, looking for models to work from, plus doing any kind of, background research that's more on paper, in addition to the outreach, and then formulating and drafting the policies and bringing them through the process. So I think we're thinking of that 12-month period as encompassing several activities, not just the outreach, but to put all of it together would take some time, and depending on which policy option we're talking about, some could be a little faster, some could take longer. The rental registry may say be a heavier lift than relocation payments or something like that. But depending on whether or not we do or don't combine outreach, that could make a difference on the timelines as well.
I have one more question in my head, and I don't know who it should be directed to, but in my head, it sounds something like if the council is interested in the information that would be in a rent registry, the data that would help us formulate future policy, but not interested in creating a new bureaucracy or something like that. Is it possible through the business licenses or something like that to get the same information just so that we are better informed for future policy?
I'm not sure we have that information for residential landlords in a way that we could readily grab and analyze it.
No, I'll just echo that comment. I mean, it's not clear to us that a business license would be the right mechanism to obtain some of this information. I mean, where rent registry has been created, it's been through its own process to collect, information about the rent, the rent being paid, the tenants who are on site, and other characteristics about the property, which isn't necessarily captured in a business license.
I'm trying to think of the data that would inform a future council about how to go about setting policies that will be better for the community. And if we have a sense for how many small mom and pop landlords are out there and how many units are being provided and a sense for the rents that those units are being rented for, that's the kind of data that I think we've often talked about in the past would have informed this conversation and potential policies. And if we can do that without creating a rent registry, that's something that I think we should at least give the council the option to do that if there's another way. That was a comment, not a question, so I guess I'm done. Sorry about that.
Thank you very much. Questions, council member?
Well, just to echo the point that Deputy Mayor Pappen made about data, while we might not have statistical data specific to the city of San Mateo, we have had a significant amount of community input through the housing element outreach process. And I was just hoping you could surface for the public what that looked like and what was involved in terms of the number of hours and the outreach effort to develop these goals and policies in the housing element, because I think that does signal a significant amount of community input and a community need to elevate them to the goals level. So I was hoping you could share a little bit about our process in terms of how we arrived at these policy and goals through the housing element process.
I'll go ahead and jump in with that one since Eloisa is a little newer to San Mateo. So we did do extensive outreach for the housing element, and we have heard back from the community for our housing element specific outreach and also for our general plan update outreach, which encompasses the housing element. We had a number of workshops, some held specifically by San Mateo. We had different topics. We had different languages. We partnered with 21 Elements, which is a countywide consortium that includes all the jurisdictions and make sure that there's consistency and that the different jurisdictions are talking to one another and that they have a conduit that allows better communications with HCD. And so over the past year plus, we have been doing extensive outreach and we've heard a lot from our community members, lots of public comments. As it relates to this specifically, we haven't been tracking them in that way, but if we are directed to go back and further explore some of these items, we probably would need to go back and look at some of the feedback we've already had.
My only other question is, I know we haven't done a deep dive into some of the rental registry models that are currently in existence, but can you speak to any kind of knowledge you might have about where they are currently implemented in in local jurisdictions in the Bay Area?
So we haven't done that research at staff level at this point in time because we haven't been directed yet to explore a rent registry. We have met with some members of the community who have done some research on their own. I know they did mention a couple of cities who had models. I believe Fremont was one of them, and I don't recall immediately which other jurisdictions had one. Maybe Visa has some data.
Yeah, I believe El Cerrito was another jurisdiction that has a rent registry.
And my last question, it seemed like, one of the things we want to be doing as with an eye to efficiency and, reducing redundancy in terms of the staff capacity, given the load that you've shared with us that's already on your plate. It sounded to me like there was a preference for taking a comprehensive approach to community input process. And I wanted to, affirm that is in fact the case. Because I think that as council members, we want to be very sensitive to our own bandwidth. And there are only so many hours in the day. And so I just wanted to make sure that we're asking that question in terms of how we manage our own time and resources.
Yes, so I think that, the work plan we put forward as part of the strategic plan this year really encapsulated what Christina had mentioned, which is doing the outreach with both the tenant groups and the housing groups, as well as doing the research on what other jurisdictions are doing, what an ordinance could potentially look like. That was, and then coming back to council towards the end of the fiscal year with some considerations to determine if we wanted to move forward. We felt like that was the most efficient way to handle this versus doing it one-off, doing the outreach for one and then implementing it, and then doing the outreach for another and then implementing it. The purpose for being here tonight is, to again affirm that that is the direction council wants to go, or whether there is a certain priority for one of these 5 options that falls to clearly the top of the list, and you want us working on that, potentially at the expense of doing it as efficiently as we could.
Thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you very much. Most of my questions have been asked, but I do have one. Is there a possibility, and do we know of, I guess you just answered that you haven't really spoken with other jurisdictions, but I think that we have to consider the idea that it might be possible, because many of the comments that I read who were emailed in said that creating a rental registry would lead to problems with privacy. And I'm just wondering, in the modern world, do we think it's possible that data could be compiled and identities removed and simply exist as data without identifying characters?
I think that's part of the research that we would have to do to determine what information we're collecting, what information is subject to the Public Records Act request, and what could be kept private. That's, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think from staff perspective, the rental registry item, I think, is the heaviest lift of all of the potential items, because there's a lot of detail involved, a lot of considerations that we would have to really dig into to make sure that we do it right, and that we're protecting data that are private, but that, knowing that, some things are going to be subject to the Public Records Act request.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Sure, thanks.
So, and I totally appreciate that any one of these things, all of them combined, are certainly a heavy lift. I guess I just want to caution us to frame something in a way before we have full information about exactly what would be entailed. And so, my understanding that there are software systems that are currently, making these registries much more achievable and easier to manage. HDL is one that I have heard of, that I understand that we actually currently contract with to manage our own short-term rental program compliance. So there are established vendors in the game. I personally don't think that we have the expertise or bandwidth in-house to even contemplate managing a rental registry. I would not support that direction, but my understanding is that these models and software systems are making this actually very feasible and at a reasonable cost also. And so I would hesitate to jump to a characterization that this is going to be a heavy lift without knowing exactly what the lift is and what solutions are out there. I guess that was a comment, not a question.
It was.
Sorry.
Thanks. Okay, I know that we have a lot of public commenters. How many do we have, Patrice?
At this time, if you're in the audience and you want to comment, please bring me your speaker slip. And on the Zoom call, if you're intending to comment, please raise your hand at this time so we can get an accurate count. Okay, thank you. So in the room, we have eight speakers in the room, and I have 10 speakers on the Zoom call.
Okay, seeing that and knowing we'll have another meeting after this, also going to demand some time. That's 18 speakers. I think we better go with, well, if we go for 2 minutes, that's kind of long. I think 1 minute each. So make your expressions concise. Thank you. We'll start with those in the room.
Yes, we're going to start with those in the room. If we could have you come up to the speaker by Christine right there. She has a microphone. You could come and speak to that, into the microphone right there when I call your name. The first speaker is Jeff Lamont.
I also want to mention for anybody who sent letters in, we did read all of your letters. So you don't have to repeat word for word whatever your letter said. Thank you.
Do I have to bend over? Is this going to pick up from distance? Pretty good distance. Mr. Mayor, council members, my name is Jeff Lamont, and I'm a property owner here in San Mateo. And in the past, I have been a housing provider as I owned rental property in the city for a number of years. I'm a little bit surprised that these proposal has even made it to this council, this study session without the data and the outreach being done up front. I really think that if these are proposals that were seriously, that you guys are going to consider, that the outreach should have been done up front. Furthermore, I wanted to voice my strong opposition to the tenant protection policies that are being proposed here. I was surprised to learn of this proposal, especially coming so soon after Measure Q's defeat in 2016 by an overwhelming 60-40 vote. I might remind the council members that these citizens are a lot of the ones who elected you guys and may or may not elect you in the future. The citizens of San Mateo have spoken. They are against rent control and tenant protections that serve to divide housing providers and tenants. And I think the most alarming thing on all these proposals is the rental registry. Not that I'm opposed to all of them, but it's going to be costly, cumbersome, and most alarmingly, it will expose personal data to public
I'm
scrutiny.
sorry, I think your time is up.
Okay, but I would just finish with, it's an invasion of privacy. And I think tenants and homeowners, property providers are going to push back hard on this. Rental registry is a horrible idea.
Next speaker is Brian Ponte.
Good evening, Mayor Bonilla, members of the City Council. I would like to echo Councilmember Pappin's opening question about where's the data, and encourage you to develop independently developed data that helps us understand the depth and breadth of this problem that we're trying to solve. We can all sit here and swap anecdotes, but that's meaningless. You're talking about a very overreaching and invasive system that could seriously jeopardize your housing providers. So I ask you to take a step back and really examine with independently developed data what the problem is. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Mitch.
I'm sorry, while we have the clock stopped, I'd like to mention that we're here tonight without the data because we're going to, the no decisions are being made tonight. There's going to be no vote. Okay, we're simply trying to determine whether we're going to go forward with this or not. And if we do, we're going to tell staff what we think we would like them to work on in terms of gathering data, because it's a lot of work. It's time and money. So that's all. So that's why we don't have the data. Thank you very much. Please go ahead.
Okay, in the room, next speaker is Mitch Spiegel, followed by Fernando Pina. So you could be ready.
Hi, Council. Appreciate the time today. I'm a renter in District 5. So unlike a lot of the people who will be speaking, I actively rent. I'm a tenant. And I have a great landlord. And I see these policies as directly kind of impacting their ability to do the good work that they do to provide the housing that we enjoy. I oppose the study of these. I think that if we are going to spend our time and resources, as you pointed out, Mayor Bonilla, that it should be about proactive measures. I'd love to see ADU amnesty programs. I'd love to see more housing, frankly. And I just think that if we go down this path, we're going to spend a lot of time and energy on a problem that makes it tougher for landlords to do the good work that they do. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Fernando Pina is next, followed by Elaine Gilbert.
Good evening, Mayor Bonilla and members of the council. My name is Fernando Pena, Director of Government Affairs for the San Mateo County Association of Realtors. Burdensome regulations such as just cause evictions and relocation payments and the rest will have unintended consequences on pushing small housing providers out of the rental market. We have a lot of problems with the rental registry, for example, because it will be costly, as we've talked about, cumbersome and most alarming, exposing personal data to public scrutiny. Why burden small housing providers instead of encouraging collaboration between your constituents? Most housing provider and tenant disputes should be resolved between parties in a collaborative way through the constituent model. There's already a robust network of supportive services throughout the county and in the state, as well as regulations, as we mentioned, 1482, AB 1482, that addresses the concerns of tenants. We would support giving direction to staff to research what is already in place to protect tenants, not new policies. We are concerned that these policies will lead to the vilification of housing providers here in San Mateo County, just as it has in the city of Redwood City. Thank you.
Sorry.
Next speaker is Elaine Gilbert, followed by Jennifer Martinez.
Hi, Mayor Bonilla and City Council, thanks for letting me speak. Many of my comments are the same as Fernando's because I'm the association executive from San Mateo County Association of Realtors. So I want to bring the point up that we'd like to see more collaboration of how tenants and landlords can solve their disputes. And also we are aware of many programs and we promote them for people to own real property. That's the greatest way to attain wealth. Many of the people who own real property are the mom and pop landlords who have such a good relationship between the tenants and landlords. So there are already places in situations in place, a robust network of support services where people can solve the problems. So I think making more regulations would cause more problems because the mom and pops would want to get out of the landlord business, sell the property, and it would create a vacuum for more institutional buyers to come who will not have the human factor with their tenants. Thank you.
Next speaker is Jennifer Martinez, followed by Ramil Vijay. I'm not sure if I have that correct.
Good evening. Thank you so much for taking up this subject. I have two things I want to say. First, we've been coming to this council for almost 8 years, maybe longer. And every time we come to talk about what tenants need in order to feel safe and stably housed, we come up with the question of data. We don't have it. We have anecdotes, which many of the participants today have already identified, and a rent registry, or whatever we want to call it, something that can tell us what is actually happening in the lives of our community members, 50,000 of whom are renters, is incredibly important to making good policy. So that's my first comment, and this is urgent. The second is that I was part of negotiating and writing AB 1482. So I want to speak in support of closing the loopholes with the conversations with the California Apartment Association, the California Association of Realtors. There was an intention behind that policy, which was to ensure that it was substantial renovations that would lead to the displacement or eviction of people. So there was an intention, and I think this policy or this approach only tries to meet that intention. Thank you so much.
Thank you. The next speaker is Ramil Vijay, please, followed by Jordan Grimes.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and council members. I specifically want to speak on the renovations aspect of this bill. My family has been a small-time landlord in the city since 1986. When we have renovations, we generally do substantial renovations, and we tend to work with tenants. In 25 years, we have not ever displaced the tenants. We tend to line them up when we have a unit that's readily available, and we work together and we place them in a unit that we already have, and then we go ahead and conduct the renovations. And since there is a cost of renovations, we work on a price as well. So the tenant feels good going into a property that is substantially updated, and they don't mind paying a little bit more, but that's something that the landlord and the tenant works together with. If you guys do this, I think there'd be a higher chance of more deferred maintained buildings, a lot of dilapidated buildings that just will go not maintained for several years because there's no incentive for the investor or the landlord. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Next speaker is Jordan Grimes, followed by Ann Wilson.
Good evening, Council, Honorable Mayor. My name is Jordan Grimes, 19th Avenue Park, lifelong resident of San Mateo. I'm in strong support of all the options offered on the table tonight, and I want to strongly urge you to have staff study them for implementation. There's been a lot of discussion about data here. I want to say this. Lack of data is currently what a rental registry is supposed to solve. It's why it's so important. We do not have good empirical data. In fact, we have no data. We have anecdata. It's a completely different thing. We need our policies to be data-driven. That is the cornerstone of good public policy. We do not need to reinvent the wheel. Many, many jurisdictions have already implemented these policies successfully, have seen tremendous success with them, and we should, instead of doing this all ourselves, build on what they have already created. I do just want to note how important this is for the housing element for affirmatively furthering fair housing. And in fact, tenant protections are mentioned in HCD's guidance memo on affirmatively furthering fair housing. So renters make up 48% of the population here. They need your help, and I would urge you to support them. Thank you.
Thank you. And the last speaker in the room is Ann Wilson.
Good evening, Council. As a property owner in San Mateo, I hear everything about rental protection for the renters. I'd like to know if there's anything also on the table for owner protection, because I just heard a story on the news too about a guy in Oakland who rented his parents' house out to a couple, both working from home during the pandemic, making an income, and didn't pay their rent for a whole year, and he couldn't kick them out. So I'd like to know if there's anything on the table for us. My tenants, I met you, are very happy with me, and thank you for very much. And I'm not sure about this business license now. I mean, the duplex that I own, that was my parents since 1974, has never been asked to get a business license out for this property. And now all of a sudden I'm being asked to do it. This is something new and not completely sure about it. So I kind of like that addressed a little more. Thank you.
Thank you. First speaker on the Zoom call is Maggie Trin. Maggie, please unmute yourself.
Hi, my name is Maggie. I support all of the all of the tenant protections listed and would love to have staff study them, including the rental registry. I've been living in San Mateo for over 10 years and am a homeowner. But before that, I was a renter. And I have to say, you know, all of these landlords who are saying that they're good landlords, great for you. These protections are meant to protect tenants who have bad landlords. So it's really to recognize the power imbalance between landlords and tenants. Tenants often have no other place to go if the landlord decides to jack up the rent a lot. So I want to make sure that we do have the data to show the housing shortage and you know what the rents are in San Mateo. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker is Nora Lee Holmes.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Nora. I'm a local realtor and resident for more than 20 years. I'm personally also an investor, you know, kind of like a mom and pop shops. We do have a good tenant relationship. However, I want to bring awareness about, a couple of speakers before me mentioned about protection to landlords. I recently helping my client to rent a property in San Mateo. I had a horrible experience about the tenants telling me making $15,000 a month, but on their paper only shows $18,000 a month. So that shows me that not only the federal government and state government lose revenues because they don't pay taxes, but also the local government so too. And with all the rising costs, supply for repairs and all of that, we're hearing for any renovations and costs us as a landlord $400 per square foot. So if there is a reason, I think we're all human beings. We all want to live in this beautiful city. However, there is an inevitable cost to landlords to make the tenants happy. So if we regulate landlords, we should also put some, brackets for our tenants to make sure the landlord is also protected in that way. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Suzanne Moore.
Good evening, Suzanne Moore, and I, like my fellow member Carol Eldridge, represent the Anti-Displacement Committee of San Mateo. The ADC is committed to address our housing crisis through reduction of displacement. Tenant protection is inherent to that effort. The state mandates of fair housing inspire all our communities to do our part. And here's what we know. 1, low-income residents and their families and people of color are disproportionately displaced. 2, the first 6 months after displacement are a time of increased risk for homelessness. 3, stable housing is necessary for life and health. Our homeless live on average 10 to 15 years less than those stably housed. 4, our communities are adversely impacted by lack of housing for our essential workers, our school kids, our residents who are elderly, disabled, and mentally ill. 5, our legal aid and core agency associates currently report an increase of evictions, all this occurring at the start of the school year and a potential COVID winter surge. The need is acute. And 6, anti-displacement policies work to prevent evictions and homelessness and keep our neighbors housed. Urgent efforts are needed. I appreciate this council's leadership. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Ryan Montashemi.
Good evening, Council, Honorable Mayor Bonilla. Thank you very much. I'm in support as well as with all of the tenant protections outlined here, and think you should move quickly and swiftly to study them and implement them. We need the data, and that's what researching is about. So this study session is the kickoff point to do that. Good public policy should not rely on the hope of benevolence by landlords who are incentivized to support policies that protect their financial interests, as opposed to the interests of tenants. And I echo what others have said, that there is an inherent power imbalance here between landlords and tenants that you as a council need to address through those protections. A rental registry can be implemented cheaply and efficiently, and it is high time that we all had a shared data set from which to craft intelligent policy. And I also support closing the rent evictions loophole. This is important. Through my work, I have seen the trauma of eviction, so it needs to stop.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Kiana Simmons.
Hello, members of San Mateo City Council. My name is Kiana Simmons, and I'm an organizer with the Housing Leadership Council of San Mateo County. We work with our communities and their leaders to produce and preserve quality, affordable homes. I'd first like to thank staff for all their hard work in putting together their report for this proposal that brought us together for a discussion tonight. On behalf of the Housing Leadership Council, I'd like to express our support for tenant protections, especially closing the loopholes and make good on the intentions of State Law AB 1482. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Robert Whitehair.
Thank you, Honorable Mayor, Council, and staff for addressing another issue with climate crisis reverberations. The way we treat tenants is part of the larger climate justice issue. It is about whether housing will be fair and available for all. A data registry is a great way to assure compliance across the board with AB 1482, because right now there's no way to track whether landlords are adhering to the requirements. I'm going to speak as a former landlord for 9 years in San Mateo. I believe that a majority of landlords do follow the law and are fair landlords. but landlords who who adhere to the law are at a disadvantage if they follow
Robert?
the law.
Robert, your time is up.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Next speaker is Rovi Lynn Antonio.
Hi, good evening, Mayor Bonilla and City Councilor Rovilia Antonio with California Apartment Association, or CAA. I'm a little bit concerned that we are having this meeting tonight, considering that Governor Newsom stated that AB 1482 is the strongest renter protections in the country. I also want to remind the council that AB 1482 was enacted, went into effect January 1st, 2020. 75 days later, we had the worldwide pandemic, COVID-19. So I fail to see why we need to have a meeting to strengthen 1482 when we've only had 75 days to evaluate whether 1482 is not enough. I think the real question here is that we should be having a meeting to check in with our housing providers to see how they've been doing and how they've survived the pandemic when they were forced to give 2 years of rent for free during the pandemic. And there are some who got taken advantage of. I think that is
I'm
what
sorry,
we should
Rovi,
be.
your time is up. I'm sorry.
It's okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Jin Ma.
Mayor Bonilla, City Council members. I lived in Bradford Hillsdale neighborhood for 25 years. With all respect, the agenda to advance these policies should.
Could you
not-
speak up or get closer to your microphone, please? We can barely hear you.
Yeah, the agenda to advance these policies should not move forward. These policies in whole will divide the community, not unite it. Just a couple of examples. Rental registry. The goal appears just to be to find another goal. It's a fuzzy, it's all in the air, it's blue sky policy, where the final benefit is unknown and the harm is clear and present, as presented in the slides. It faced strong opposition in all jurisdictions. As a community member, I will strongly oppose this policy if it is on the agenda. And just cause eviction. As noted separately, it is guaranteed to create inequality and inequity. As a community member, I will strongly oppose it if this policy is on the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Mike Caggiano. Following that, we have 4 additional speakers. Our last speaker will be Ricardo M.
Yeah, Council, appreciate the opportunity. Just letting you guys know that data is important. And I'm sure the post office is perfectly happy to find out who's moved where in order to deliver the mail. I mean, the idea of privacy being breached seems like a bit of an absurdity to me. But I do want things done efficiently and easily. And so therefore, it would behoove everyone to see how things are done in other places, best practices. Try to make it as easy as the staff as possible to get the data they need. They definitely need data, or you're flying in the dark. And as far as the housing providers, I think they should rename themselves housing merchants, which is what they are. Not
Thank you,
trying to
Mr.
denigrate anybody.
Caggiano. Your time
but,
is up.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Justin.
Hello, I'm Justin Alley, and I'm speaking today on behalf of One San Mateo. I want to thank everyone for this meeting. So the primary policies under consideration tonight are prudent, well-tailored, and have been adopted by other cities to good effect. The impetus to improve our safety net for renters only grows by the day. In the wake of lapsing COVID evictions moratoria, we know that evictions have been spiking. We know this from Community Legal Services of East Palo Alto. So the need for improving the safety net, as I said, grows. Focusing for the rest of my comments on the rent evictions aspect, we know, between the passage of AB 1482 and the evictions moratoria, that evictions for spurious substantial remodels constitute a majority here in San Mateo. We know that from data from Legal Aid. And so, I'd also point out that items 2, 3, and 4 in the staff report basically fall under that same category of closing the rent evictions loophole. So I think it should be
Justin, your
done
time is
concurrently.
up.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Next speaker is Sarah Fields.
Hi, good evening, Council.
Sarah Fields here, renter in 19th Avenue Park. I just really want to reiterate the need for this rental registry. We all know that good policy comes from the data and the information that we all need to have to make informed decisions. One piece of data that we do have is that 48% of the city rents, it's basically half for rounding up. And anything that involves half the city should be taken seriously and thoughtfully. And that's what this is really about. So I encourage this next step and to continue to listen to all San Mateans on the issue. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Cameron Gilbert.
Hi, thank you very much, Mayor, council members. I'm lucky enough to be a homeowner in Shoreview, and I'm calling in because I think all the policies under consideration are common sense, great policies that would afford a modicum of safety to folks who are renting, as I was not that long ago. So that, in fact, I would even hope that at some point in the future, the council could go further and establish a right to counsel in eviction cases, because even though I've even rented my room out in the past, I still think it's a great policy. And I think that the overhead for landlords is not nearly proportionate to the benefit it provides tenants. And I would encourage the speedy adoption of all of these policies.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gilbert. And our last speaker is Vikas Maturi.
Hi, thank you so much. My name is Vikas Maturi, and I live in Baywood, and I'm a renter there. Near Aragon, and I just want to express my strong support for all of the policies that are shared here. These policies are all based in evidence. They have been implemented in a number of other cities to great success. The availability of data is particularly important so that we can better respond to evictions that are happening unjustly. And the right to return after renovations has recently been passed in Redwood City, and the council members and staff there have been extremely supportive of that policy. I think we can learn from them and other cities in recognizing how successful these kinds of policies are for supporting the folks in our community who have the least access to resources. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That is our last speaker.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. And now we bring it back to the council.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, please.
If I can just be heard on the data issue, since how I was the one to use the word. I'm glad to hear that so many folks want to create policy based upon data. And I think we as a city, that's what we should be doing when we're charging staff with city resources to create whatever ordinance we may come up with creating. So, but I just want to be clear that when I spoke about data, I was really focused on to make sure that there is a need for whatever path we go down. As I mentioned earlier, we are coming off of unprecedented times of tenant protections. We now have rent control, which we didn't have before. We now have just cause eviction, which was negotiated at the state. We didn't have that before. We're coming off of 2+ years of an eviction moratorium, and we're coming, we have now reached the end, and there's also been renter assistance. So I really want to get back out in the field, and I want to find out what's happening. I recognize that HCD would like to see perhaps something as it relates to tenant protections in our housing element. But I also want to be very conscious that we adopt policies to address what's happening out there. And so when I talk about data, and it may mean different things to different people, I just want to be clear about what I was after. And that is, I want to know what's going on out there, especially now after we have all those 4 items. And where are we? Are we having this volume of evictions? They might have increased, I will concede, probably after the moratorium. But is it a volume the likes of which we've never seen? Is it something reasonable, not reasonable? I don't know. And I don't know how we'll find that out. But as we go forward, that's kind of where I was coming from as to what and how we decide which policy to pursue. Because this report, albeit very informative, didn't tell me what's happening out there. So I'm not too sure which one to pick. So that's it where I am for now. Maybe we'll hear from others and they'll have some other insight. That's where I'm coming from.
Mr. Mayor?
Thank you. Please go ahead.
So I want to
thank and I appreciate all the eloquent contributions to this conversation from the people who spoke tonight. I'm very proud of the many great local landlords that we have, and I know many of them personally. We've seen from things that have come before the city council that not all of our landlords are great landlords, and so we've had issues that we had to deal with. These protections are far less impactful than the things that we've seen over the last few years. I agree 100% with Councilmember Pappen about the unprecedented times that we've seen over the last couple of years in terms of renter protections. It's been a very interesting couple of years, and it's going to take a few years to see all of the impact of that. But it is very clear that HCD wants this in our housing element, and the housing element is one of the duties of the council. We have to get our housing element approved. It's an important piece. Whatever HCD needs to see in there and how they're communicating it to us, both formally and informally, doesn't seem to be entirely fleshed out yet. It will be over the next few months. But right now, we're getting clear communication that they want to see things like that in there for now. And so I feel comfortable sending staff, requesting staff to bring us a reasonable snapshot of what is happening in the community post-pandemic. Are we seeing the kinds of evictions that would justify making these kinds of protections? Are there other ways of getting the kinds of data that we want to see in order to inform policies in the future? So that's the reason that I think we need to stay on this track and request staff to have this conversation with the community and to collect some of this data and come back to us at some point next year. It's an important part of what we do, the housing element, and has a pretty important relationship with the general plan and everything else. I want to echo something that Elaine Gilbert said, which is that the mom and pop landlords play such a critical role in our community, and they probably provide a much better, warmer experience for tenants in how they treat people very humanely and compassionately. And I'd like to see data on how that compares to perhaps the other landlords that we have. So I would like to see more data. I would like to see a snapshot from staff on what's going on out there. For the moment, I don't think that we can justify eliminating any of these things until we move forward, collect more data, have further conversations with HCD regarding the housing element and our application. Those are my comments.
Well, I've been a renter in this city. I've been a homeowner and I've been a landlord. And so I feel like I have a lot of experiences from a lot of different perspectives. And I heard some questions out there in terms of, how can we achieve a balance and what are the ways that we can support both sides of the equation? And I also heard a question that I thought might be helpful just to kind of bring up an answer in this meeting about the business license tax and how, or the business license registration and how, why this was implemented now, just so that, because I think it's part of the conversation in some ways here, it's related. And so I was going to ask our city attorney or city manager just to answer the question that was raised in terms of why are we seeing this now?
Yeah, go ahead. Thanks.
Sure. Yeah. So our business tax certificate ordinance applies to anyone who is doing business in the city. And that's defined as anyone who is taking part in activities that are generating income. So it doesn't matter if you are a corporation or an LLC or a sole proprietor, it doesn't matter. It's, are you working for the purpose of earning income? And if you are, you're subject to the business license tax. So how this came about was several years ago, we brought on a new provider to do business license compliance services for us. And as a result of that, they pointed out to us that they believed that we were misapplying our ordinance by not applying it to both commercial and residential lessors. So we had them undertake an audit. We started with the commercial properties. That audit concluded at the end of 2021, and we began implementing with the commercial lessors and having them pay the business license tax. At that point in early 2022, we undertook the audit with residential landlords, got the results, and at the beginning of the year, beginning of the fiscal year, July 1st, when the eviction moratorium had run its course, we began the implementation process with the residential landlords. This is a situation where it is a tax, it is in the ordinance. We learned that we were not compliant, and we corrected for it. And so that's where we are.
Well, I think it's helpful to share that because the timing does, is odd. I mean, I've been a landlord for over a decade, and it was news to me as well. So I think it's caught a lot of people by surprise. I think one of the most important data points that we have is county level data about the homelessness rate. And we know for a fact that that across the entire county, we are seeing a sharp increase in homelessness. So the difference between 2019, which was 1,500 and some change, and 2020 is we're up to almost 2,000 San Mateo County residents that are now homeless and unhoused. So there is definitely data about the housing crisis and how it impacts all of San Mateans and all the residents in this county. I really do put a lot of trust and faith in the thousands of hours, staff hours, and community input hours that have gone into developing the outreach and the culmination of these housing goals. So I feel that we are operating with a very strong basis of community input already, who have surfaced these housing goal policies, as well as the input that we're getting from HDC about needing to affirmatively further fair housing as a requirement to be certified. And the potential of not being certified would be catastrophic for the city. So I would agree that I think it makes sense to take a comprehensive approach. This is the decision point here is let's find out more, right? What does the community need? That's how I think we should be treating this, is opening ourselves up to the conversation. And I can't let this point go that it is a conundrum to say that we need data, but at the same time, take a position against a rental registry that would provide the data that we are looking for to justify good policy. So I can't help but call out that contradiction. And I think that we all need to get on the same page about working with a clear set of facts. We have an obligation to the city and to every resident to work with full information. And that's what I think this effort is about.
Okay, thank you. I want to mention first that as a city council, we all swear an oath of office. And that oath of office says that we swear to protect and defend the health, safety, and well-being of all the residents of the city of San Mateo. So I want to go back to 2016 because that was brought up. I didn't really see the relevancy, but I think now I do. It points out that even at that time, when of course that measure, which was put on the ballot by the public, by members of the public, failed, but it does point out that it was brought up and it was a major issue at that time because entire apartment buildings were being emptied out so that the building could be somewhat renovated. There weren't always major renovations. Quite often it was paint, carpet, some landscape touch-ups, and then the rent in some cases was doubled. And that drew alarm, and that was what caused that measure to be put on the ballot by the members of the public. So my point is that has not gone away. It's displacement. The rent burdened issue, we have renters who are paying 50% of their income on rent, to the exclusion of other things that people need, like quality food, like medications and healthcare. So there is some reality to this, and people want to know how much reality is there. So I did contact somebody today at the Legal Aid Society of San Mateo County, Maria what's that name? Let me look at that. Glasses, please. Chatterjee, with some countywide, and this is unlawful detainers that have been filed in the county, February 24, March 29, April 20, May 39, June 30, July 41, August through the 15th, 20 already. So what we know is that when you see these kind of numbers, that represents the tip of the iceberg. These are the cases that actually went and cases were filed. Most tenants just leave, right? And landlords and tenants, whatever, somehow something happens. They don't all go to court. We know that. So there's some reality to this, and that's countywide. Like I say, we don't know about the city of San Mateo in particular, but it points out that there is an issue. You mentioned that in terms of, and I want to look at these issues, just cause eviction policy. Yes, the state did enact that through AB 1482, but the loophole exists that it's not good enough to just say, well, we're doing substantial renovations without taking out a permit, which would justify the fact that substantial renovations are actually being done. Substantial renovations should need to be substantiated. And unless they are, then we don't know. And this could be what, unfortunately, we have seen in the past. And I understand there are plenty of good landlords around. We know that. We're looking at the cases. Unfortunately, the cases that come to the council are with landlords who commit egregious offenses. And we've seen some really bad things. We have improved, I think, our red tag and relocation ordinance because of that, to protect renters who have been just horribly taken advantage of. So I want to say that that loophole needs to get fixed. Relocation payments, 1 month is not enough. I'm sorry, especially if they've been paying lower rents in a building that's now going to be renovated and then rented out for more. And that's beside the point. But if you pay 1 month of whatever the lower rent was in this housing atmosphere, it doesn't go anywhere. Nobody can afford to relocate with 1 month's worth of rent. Renovation related evictions, I think I just covered. The right to return policy is really fair. It just says, you know, if they want to pay the new rent, they can come back. I just don't see what the problem. They live there, they work there, the kids go to school there, they go to church there, they have their community there. I think it's a fair thing to request and something that we should be able to work out. And I'm going to talk about compromise before I'm finished here. Rental registry. I understand the concerns about privacy. And like I said, I think we should strive to find a way where privacy can be protected. But I think we cannot do any of this without the data. Data is just the way the world works now. We need data so that we're able to tell what's going on and be able to act accordingly. Finally, I want to talk about the discussion that I heard about, well, you know, renters have had unprecedented protections over the last couple of years. And it's true, they had help, they're protected, but that doesn't mean the pendulum should swing all the way back the other way. We need to find a place where we have some balance, where we're all respecting each other and where people's needs are being met. Families who are rent burdened and, like I said, can't afford these basics, it's known, they have negative health impacts as a result of not being able to meet their healthcare needs. Children grow up living in those kind of houses with negative impacts that last the rest of their lives. This is something that we really shouldn't wish or allow upon anyone. And so I support asking staff to go forth and look at this. And I wanted to ask, you mentioned when you were asked about cities that have rental registries, El Cerrito and one other city you mentioned?
I mentioned Fremont, and after I responded, I also remembered, I believe the city of Concord was the
Concord also, that's what I was going to mention. So this is not something that's undone. The wheel has been invented. We don't know to what degree, what the quality is. We want to find these things out. We need to find a way, though, to compromise, because that is the way the world works. I wrote back to several of the letter writers today who wrote letters of comment on this, saying, I understand your concerns, but I look forward to meeting with you and trying to find a way that we can work together to find some middle ground to work this out, because simply saying no is not going to work. Thank you all. Did you hear everything you need to hear, or do we have more we need to address?
I just to summarize, I think what I heard is that you guys would like us to get some more data. I heard the whole list of topics to assess the needs a little better and return.
I think that's what you heard, yes.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Okay, we're going to move on to the next item because we don't have much left. Thank you all for being here tonight.
I think you can talk. You asked about the next item. Am I in?
Yeah, it's the way.
Do you think we can do it? I think we can do it.
Evan, what do you think? No?
I think we can do it. Let's go. It's not our first rodeo. I mean, everybody here has done it.
We know what it is.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, no. Uh-oh.
We'll give you a little slack there for that. Okay.
30 more seconds. That's it.
Hi, you all. My name is Jack Johnson. I am the city's new waste management supervisor. I come to you all from the county's Office of Sustainability, where I led the edible food recovery program. Excuse me. But perhaps since we don't have much time, I'm going to move on. In a study session in May of 2021, council started a process to bring solid waste rates into alignment with the costs of service. We are here tonight to update you and get direction as to how you'd like to proceed. As with last year, we again have Rick Simonson, Senior Vice President of HF&H Consultants, and Gabe Sasser, Senior Associate, here to lead us through Zoom through the process and supply the background and advice. We contract with HF&H to advise us on setting our rates for organics and recycling diversion and landfill disposal. Last year, council chose to increase rates for 1 year using a mix of reserves and rate increases, and directed staff to come back this year to consider a longer period between 3 and 5 years. To provide some context, in 2006, the city was out of compliance, and you began a process of getting into compliance, which is required under Proposition 218. The current target is a statewide diversion rate of 75% by 2025, with a near total ban on organics being landfilled. This is to reduce our production of methane. I'm going to turn it over to HF&H for their presentation, after which staff will turn it over to council for discussion and to seek direction. Thank you.
Good evening. This is Rick Simonson, Senior Vice President with HF&H. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So I pulled up the slides first to go over tonight's agenda. What are the goals of tonight's study session? I know we don't have too much time, so we'll move things quickly. We're here just to present some preliminary results and get some feedback. We're not looking for specific action on adopting any rates here tonight. First, the goals for the study session is to preview our preliminary results for a 5-year rate revenue adjustment plan. As Jack mentioned, there's a maximum of 5 years of rates you can adopt at any one time. We'll have different options for adopting anywhere from 1 through 5 years of rates, and how those rates through a cost of service analysis may impact your different customer classes, and the actual monthly impacts the different levels of service may see under these preliminary results. And then we'd like to get your feedback, answer any questions you may have. So the first step is to understand the expenses that need to get covered. For those that may not be aware, Recology is responsible for collection within the city through a franchise agreement with the city. They do submit an application for compensation every June 15th for the next year. So this past June 15th, they submitted their compensation application to the South Bayside Waste Management Authority. That's the JPA of 10 member agencies, for which the city is one of those 10. So the SBWMA is currently reviewing that application and should have their final results on whether this is the appropriate compensation for Recology at their September meeting. Typically, there's not too many major adjustments to what they have requested. So currently they're requesting 15.8 million, and the franchise agreement lays out how that's calculated each year based on indices, fuel increases, labor increases. So it's very mathematical. So we don't see it changing much from this 15.8, if at all. The next category of costs are once Recology collects the materials from your residents and businesses, they deliver it to the Shorewave facility owned by the SBWMA. So your organics, recyclables, and solid waste is tipped there at that facility, and the various material types are either processed there on site or delivered elsewhere, like landfill at Ox Mountain, or organic materials are transferred and processed at another site, Newbie Island in Milpitas. So that's a central location that Recology, when they're done collecting on the city streets, delivered to the Shorewave facility, and costs associated with that are based on your volumes of tons that are expected and the tip fees set by the SBWMA, and that's estimated to be 8.2 million for this forthcoming year. And lastly, there are city expenses that are covered with the rates, costs that are tracked by the city for expenses such as street cleaning or installing trash capture devices, various solid waste programs, and outreach to residents, and that's another $5 million. So all told, the rates need to generate 29 million. So the next step is to understand what your current rates will generate. And based on year-to-date actuals through June and annualizing those costs, we're projecting about a 7.6% increase in your revenues in 2022. So if you kept the rates the same in 2023, we would expect to see about $27.8 million in revenues. And the increases in revenues are not a surprise. Last year, a 5% overall increase was adopted, something greater for single families. So that's why we see about a 12% increase in their revenues, and about 5.6 and 5.9% increase in your commercial, multifamily, and roll-off rate revenue. So we're not surprised to see this bump at your current rates. In addition, there are some non-rate revenues that I should mention. The city can go out for grants, of which they've been successful in the past year. So anywhere from about $500,000 to 1.1 million in non-rate revenues are also available to help pay for these costs. So we pull all that together when we set out to understand what type of revenue increase you need. So this is a little busy slide, but the intent here is to look at, if we don't change rates, how will revenues fare compared to expenses? So the stacked bar represents your expenses that are increasing over time based on inflationary increases. The solid black line represents total revenue at current rates. See a slight decrease there because we don't project as much grant and other non-rate revenues coming in to be on the safe side. So you do see revenues exceeding expenses. What we're also showing on this graph with this blue and red line is you do have reserves in your solid waste fund to help mitigate any drastic shortfalls or monies needed for emergencies. So that's depicted with the red line. If we do nothing, your current balance of about 9.6 million of reserves would be quickly depleted, and by 2027, there would be no reserves left. So we do know some sort of revenue increase is necessary over the next 5 years. And I'll just mention that solid blue line there that's 12.5% of your total expenses, which is a good target to keep your reserves above that line. So that's what that blue line is representing. So we're looking at some sort of increase over the next 5 years. So there's a couple strategies as we employed last year. Either, and let me start with the first, you can just increase rates and not touch reserves. Or you can only use reserves and not touch rates, or a combination of the two. And last year, the council, for the 1 year increase, it was a combination of 1 and 2, and that's what we're recommending again this year. Some sort of increase, but also dipping into reserves to help mitigate the impact of that increase. So we're put together 2 scenarios here on what that would mean to your reserves. So the first scenario really is if you just touch rates, we'd be looking at 3% revenue increases over the next 5 years to keep that red line, which represents your reserve balance, pretty even over the next 5 years. But as I mentioned, we're recommending and coming forth with the scenario number 2, which recommends dipping into those reserves. That's what they're there for. They've been built by revenue stabilization funds from rates and rate revenue coming in greater than expenses. So those reserves are there to be used to help mitigate some of these larger increases. So we're recommending a 3% increase in revenue this coming year, followed by 2% increases instead of 3% increases. Again, making use of those reserves that are there for this purpose. So once we've gone through steps 1 through 3, which is identifying the revenue requirement, which are the expenses, your revenues, and then building a strategy for bridging that shortfall. The last step here is just because we need a 3% increase doesn't mean every rate just increases by 3%. We need to design the rates to make sure we generate that necessary revenue, but it's also based on the cost of service by customer class and specific service level. So as I mentioned, we need to increase rates by 3% or 28.3 million, but Prop 218 is our guiding principle here that says fees and charges must be proportional to the cost of providing service attributable to the parcel. So we need to look at what the costs are for each of the different service levels and not just apply a 3% increase to every rate. So there's 2 phases involved. First is looking at each customer class. So you currently have 3 customer classes: residential that receive 3 carts and they're serviced each week. And then you have multifamily and commercial that has a wide range of services that can be provided, be they in carts or bins of various sizes, and they can be collected anywhere from 1 to 7 days per week. Once we get through phase 1 with customer class, within each of those classes, we need to make sure each service level pays for itself. For example, residents can choose from a 20-gallon container up to a 96-gallon container. So we need to make sure each of those rates represent the cost of service. So we need to dig a little deeper. So what we did through analyzing Recology's costs and looking at the various trucks that go down the road and their costs to operate those routes that are specific to your single family customer class, or the trucks that are different and being used for the commercial multifamily collection, we allocated the costs, and that's what we call the 2023 cost of service. And what we notice when we compare that to revenue at current rates is that the single family revenue is not meeting the 2023 cost of service by about $5.8 million. We do see that commercial and multifamily have met their cost of service and roll off just slightly below their cost of service. So these aren't unexpected results. We're seeing this in many communities throughout California as single family tends to have rates that incentivize diversion. So they tend to be lower rates than the true cost of service to really encourage people to recycle. But Prop 218 wants us to realign that. Doesn't need to happen all in 1 year. So that's why we've devised a 5-year plan to get us there. So that's a big difference to make up all at once. So here's an example of the different residential service levels ranging from 20 to 96-gallon containers. You see the current rate, for example, for 20-gallon of $19.59 doesn't meet the cost of service that's been calculated for 2023. That's a significant 152% increase. So we're not recommending doing that. Again, phasing it in over time. But also on this chart, you can see as the size gets bigger, that differential gets a bit smaller. And this is something we saw last year. And council decided to begin that transition of trying to align those costs last year. And the 20-gallon container needed a 199% increase last year. That's been cut by about a quarter. And the 32-gallon about 112%. So we've made strides. So we're still working on a plan and getting there over time. Commercial multifamily, as I mentioned, that customer class as a whole has been meeting their cost of service. But as we dug a little deeper, we noticed even with the carts, those smaller 20 and 32-gallon we're seeing the cost of service does exceed the current rate, not nearly to the extent that residential carts are, but those smaller carts do need a little bump to get closer to their cost of service. So these are the analyses that help us determine a proper rate design. One other thing I'll mention, it's a bit premature to try and tackle right now, but it's something we'll be looking at over the next few years, is that rates have been, for organic recycling, have been discounted by 25% or set at 75% level to encourage organics recycling. However, SB 1383 makes it mandatory, so that encouragement is no longer necessary. So we consider removing that discount, but it's a bit premature. The system or the program is still being implemented by Recology, and I see it's 7 o'clock. My apologies. Let me jump straight to our recommendation. It's a small slide, but what we're recommending is 20 and 32 gallon carts increasing by $4 per month, and 64 and 96 increasing a lesser amount, $2 per month, because they're closer to their cost of service. And that's for single family. Commercial, we're recommending just a $2 increase on those smaller carts and leaving the 64 gallon and 96 gallon carts the same, as well as the bins the same, because we have found they've already met their cost of service. I'll skip quickly. Should I stop here, open for questions? I know you have.
Thank you. That would be great. Thank you. Let me just see if we can. I think if you would put up your ask on the screen, please. I think I need to ask the council because it is a little overdue for the other meeting. We can go a little longer if we have to, but let me just say, the council members feel like they've heard enough about the presentation based on what we read and what we're hearing now. Do we think we can make a informed decision here?
I have a question.
Okay, we have a question.
Yes.
So I wanted to ask, does the proposed rates for the 20 gallon bins, does that in any way factor in what I think we may want to contemplate, like an incentive to use smaller bins, or are we just aiming for cost recovery? Because I think that if we structure the rates in a way that is discounting lower production of waste, that actually has, it furthers our goals in other ways that is cost savings. So I just wonder if that's been contemplated at all in the structure.
No, that's a great question. So that's how rates used to be set without truly looking at the cost of providing that service. So we are attempting to set it at the true cost and not provide any discount because Prop 218 says you must set the rates at the true cost of that service.
Oh, we're required to.
However, there still is an incentive because by the time we get to the cost of service, you'll still see maybe a $5 to $10 savings with those smaller containers because there's less being landfilled, there's less routes that would be needed to provide that service if everybody had a 20 gallon. So there is an inherent incentive there, but it is based on the cost of service.
Okay,
it's been successful, just real quick, it's been successful in the past. More than 60% of your customers are in a 20 and 32 gallon container.
Okay, that's really helpful to understand. And then my other question is, do we have any longer timelines for the projected increases or where our reserves will end up? If we're planning for 5 years out and then the reserve levels have dipped down to the target, are we, the next 5 year cycle, are we looking at, 3%, 5%, 10% increases? I guess for me, it would be helpful to have a little bit longer vantage point to weigh the different options.
Sure. And the reason we chose 5, we had not looked beyond that. The reason we've chosen 5 is a Prop 218 only allows to adopt 5, but we could project out further. It gets a little more fuzzy when you try and project too far out. But the way the Recology contract is set up, it mirrors basically inflation. So if we see inflation back down to the 3 to 4% range, we could expect potentially in year 6 through 10 something similar.
Okay, because I guess I just wanted some assurance that we're not saddling the next council 5 years from now with a huge increase.
Yeah, and I'll just add, if council decides to adopt a 5-year increase, we will continue to look at the trajectory over the course of that 5 years. And if we need to course correct, we would come back and course correct. This just provides us with the ability to, if things go as planned, have 5 years adopted at once. But if we need to course correct midstream, we can absolutely do so.
I just want to say, I like the idea of dipping into reserves right now because we are where we are with the economy. So normally I like to just keep as big a reserve as possible, but I think it's an appropriate recommendation. I really do.
Scenario 2, where we could use both reserves and increase.
Correct?
Yeah.
I thought that was 3.
There is no 3.
You had increase, dip into reserves, and number 3 was both of them.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Number 2 was reserves and increase. Am I correct, Rick?
Yeah, I showed 2 options. I apologize. There's 3 ways of bridging the gap.
Rick, can you go back to that slide?
Yeah, we showed 2 options. With only increasing rates would be 3% annual increases. And then we showed a hybrid of increasing rates and dipping into reserves, which is scenario 2, which is a 2% increase.
And what's the percentage of increases in that scenario?
3% for 2023 and 2% thereafter.
Rick, in making these recommendations, did you have access to tens of thousands of household information from City of San Mateo residents and what kind of card they have and what type of account they have and how much they pay for that size card?
Yeah, we have customer service level information. So just has been identified not by address or name, but who has what size cart or bin and how often it's collected. So we can build up the revenues and allocate costs according to service levels.
For how many years?
We use the most current count because it's a point in time. So this was this first quarter of this year.
Thanks, Rick.
Okay, so unless no more questions, we're going to go to public comment quickly. Madam Clerk, do we have any? Okay, seeing no public comment, we'll close the public comment period, bring it back for final comments here.
I would go, I know you're not looking for a vote, but I'm leaning towards the combination of reserves and lesser increases over time.
Me too.
As do I, yeah. Right. I want to caution, there was some discussion about further working to influence people to migrate to the smallest container. There are some people who will take the smallest container and fill it up and then fill up half the blue one with the same stuff they put in the black one. So we have to be careful and watch that.
And it
At the
generates less
collection
revenue
center, we're
too.
talking about the possibility. In fact, I think we may have implemented a separate sorting ability inside of the tipping floor where the garbage goes so that we can separate additional recyclables from the garbage and vice versa. So
To Rick's point, we want everyone to get the largest can and put nothing in it.
yeah, all I want to say is I look forward to educational outreach so that people understand what goes in each one, because I see a lot of neighbors with huge amounts of styrofoam, which isn't recyclable by us at all. And yes, thank you.
What kind of time frame would you like? 3 years, 5 years?
A 5-year.
Thank you.
Okay, well then I think it sounds like we have. Thank you very much. We'll adjourn
We
this
have to do
meeting.
it every year,
You
regardless.
need 5 minutes?
Yes.
Okay.